Travis didn't speak when it happened, not at first. Just stood there, keys still swinging in his hand, staring at the empty parking spot where his car used to be. The late sun peeled shadows down the row of stucco condos, casting long blood-orange streaks across the HOA parking lot. And Karen, yes, her name was really Karen, yes, just smiled as if she'd won something. But this isn't about a petty neighborhood feud. Not anymore. Because if you're watching this, you've probably seen the video. It's the one they keep taking down. The one that doesn't make sense. It's the one where Karen disappears. Not leaves, disappears. Frame by frame, blink, and she's gone. And it all started because she took his spot. Asterisk, the first toe was petty. Sure, a quiet, calculated retaliation. Travis had proof, of course. Of course, time-stamped photos, recordings, even a neighbor's dash cam. He filed the report, gave a nod to the driver, and watched her BMW get dragged out of the space he'd paid for. Same one she blocked off for weeks with traffic cones and smug little HOA notices. It should have been the end of it. But when the car came back the next day, same exact spot, same exact angle, same faint smear of bird droppings on the windshield, it wasn't just strange. It was wrong. Like time had repeated itself in perfect detail. Like the scene had reset. Even the breeze felt the same. That night, someone knocked on his door at 2:13 a.m. A single knock, then silence. But when Travis checked the camera feed, there was nothing. No shadow, no movement, just static. Only one frame caught a shape, a blur. A woman in white, standing in the parking space where the BMW had been. The second toe? It wasn't revenge, it was panic. Then the voices started. Not in his head, his phone. Buried in voicemails he didn't remember receiving. An elderly woman's voice, whispering names he didn't recognize, always ending the same way. He knows you see it now. Do not go near the red light. Travis didn't tell anyone who would believe him, but people felt it. Neighbors stopped watering their lawns. Dogs refused to go near the parking spot. And Karen, she began to change. Slower movements, glassy eyes, like something else was using her bones. The day she vanished, she had been screaming. Not words, just noise. From her front porch to the edge of Travis's driveway, shrieking like she was drowning in dry air. Then she looked at him dead into his eyes and said one sentence no one else heard. The security footage shows her mouth move, but the audio cuts out. Everyone says it's corrupted. Only Travis hears it in his dreams, over and over. Asterisk, you took what was meant to be locked away, and here's the part no one can explain. The tow company doesn't exist. Not anymore. It was dissolved 7 years ago after its last driver went missing in the same neighborhood. No forwarding address, no business records, just a blurred logo caught on Travis's ring cam, a red key inside a white circle. There's more, so much more. But the next part doesn't come from Travis. It comes from the baby down the street. The one who hasn't learned to speak, yet who looked straight into his mother's eyes last night and said his name. Travis. Clear as day. Then one more word. Run. The HOA is calling a meeting tomorrow. They say it's about disturbances and unauthorized surveillance. But if you pause the leaked agenda on frame 219, you'll see something scrawled in the margins. In handwriting too old for any of them to have written. Asterisk, the red light isn't a warning. Door. Asterisk, and someone just opened it. Travis didn't sleep that night. Not even the slow drip of melatonin and whiskey could drown the pulse of that single word run, echoing like blood pressure in his ears. He lay awake, listening to the house breathe. The creak of old wood, the flutter of the HVAC, the hum from the refrigerator that seemed just slightly off pitch, like it was mimicking the sound of something alive. But he didn't move, couldn't, because the baby across the street had said his name, and that had never happened before. Except now he wasn't entirely sure. He got up at dawn and went through every voicemail, every video, every glitching frame of the ring cam like a man scraping at his own skin for answers. And that's when it happened, the first real crack. One of the voicemails, the elderly voice with the red light warning, it had changed. The tone was the same. Same cadence, same pauses. But the words were different. We swore the first time she said, "He knows you see it now, but now, clear as day," she said. "She knows where you've been." The file hadn't been replaced. No duplication timestamp. Same metadata, same length, just ... different. And when he tried to play it again, it was gone. No trash bin, no recovery folder, just static. Travis checked the camera footage of Karen's disappearance for the 100th time. She still vanished in frame 647. Still that slow-motion moment where she reaches toward him and just stops existing. But now her reflection in the car window, it lingered. Half a second longer than it should have, looking the wrong direction, not at him but directly at the camera. He rubbed his temples until he felt the veins pressing back. Was this memory rot? Is he finally unraveling from months of isolation, petty wars with HOA board members, paranoia, insomnia? Or was he being led somewhere by something that knew exactly how to weaponize doubt? And that's when Casey came back. They hadn't spoken in 6 years. She was the kind of friend you only kept if you were willing to carry someone else's ghosts when they didn't want them anymore. Travis wasn't. Not back then. Not after what happened in Oregon. But she showed up at his doorstep like she'd just finished a conversation they never had. "You're still seeing them, aren't you?" she said, stepping over the threshold before he could answer. He almost laughed, but her face didn't match the situation. She looked sick, pale, wired, like someone had been talking to her through a wall for too long and she'd finally started talking back. "You said you wanted help," she continued, as if he had. "And I told you last time. Whatever's happening, it's not new. It started before the tow. Before Karen." Travis blinked. "What do you mean last time?" Casey sat on the edge of the couch like she was testing whether it was real. "You called me last week, Travis. You don't remember?" He didn't. Not even the faintest ringing of that memory. She reached into her coat pocket and slid her phone across the table. One voicemail, labeled 2:11 a.m. His voice. Right. Shaking. Wrong. "You have to come back. I think something followed me here," it said. "It's inside her car, and I think it's learning how to move on its own now." Then a sound, not quite breathing, not quite wind, something that sounded like water trying to remember how to speak. Casey paused the recording. "You were crying? You begged me not to come alone? Then you hung up." "I've been driving for 16 hours. He stared at the phone. "I never called you." She didn't blink. "No. But you do this, Travis. You forget. That's how it starts." The worst part, it felt familiar. Like she wasn't telling him something new, she was reminding him. The lines of the living room felt distorted, not twisted or melting just off. Like the room was a photograph of itself, and someone had quietly reshot it with a different lens. Casey said she needed to see the footage. He pulled it up, let it play. But the screen showed something else this time. Karen didn't disappear. She walked toward him, mouth open. Whispering, Casey grabbed his wrist and turned the volume up hard. No. Audio. Just something scrawled in the corner of the frame, something that hadn't been there before. A string of numbers. August 14th, 05. Travis sat back, breath thinning. "That's the day I was found." Casey went still. "What?" "I got lost as a kid. During a camping trip. They found me 3 days later in the woods, 6 miles from the campsite. I didn't remember anything. Just that number etched into a rock near my sleeping bag." Silence crawled in through the windows. Casey opened her bag, pulled out a thick folder wrapped in an old sleep shirt. She laid it on the table with trembling fingers. "Travis, this isn't your first missing person case. You were one. They never said what happened in those woods, but you started seeing patterns after that. You wrote them down. You filled journals with it. Called me once and told me there were 2 versions of your life, and only one of them had a shadow that moved like yours." Travis shook his head. "That's not true. I've never." She opened the folder. Dozens of pages, handwriting that looked like his. Diagrams of loops, time anomalies, people with names like Rhoda, Sawyer, Darren, Cale Henderson, and drawings. Karen's face. Before he ever met her. "I don't remember writing this," Travis whispered. Casey didn't look up. "That's the part they count on. They don't need to erase what you know. They just have to rewrite when you knew it." He stood. The air felt thicker now, not suffocating. It's watching. "Who are they?" he asked, voice barely his own. She turned to the window. The parking lot was empty. But something was wrong with the reflection in the glass. His own shape was blurred at the edges. like it wasn't finished being drawn. "You asked that once already," she said, "and then you stopped asking?" That's when things got worse. Travis's throat tightened, a pressure behind his eyes. He tried to speak. But then, from the hallway, his phone buzzed. A notification. Voicemail. Unknown number. He played it on speaker. This time, it wasn't the old woman. It was his voice again. But it was screaming. "No, no, no, don't let her in. She's not real. Casey's not real. She's not." The phone slipped from his hand. Casey didn't flinch. She just looked at him, slowly tilting her head, and smiled. A long, patient, pitying smile. Like someone who'd just watched the trap finally spring shut. Then she said it again soft, like a lullaby. "You took what was meant to be locked away." But her lips didn't move. Only the reflections did. The window now showed two shadows standing behind him, and neither were his. To be continued. When you're ready to remember what happened on August 14th, 2005. The first time Travis thought he'd solved it, it was raining. Not the summer storm kind of rain that rolls through and leaves the pavement steaming, but a soft, numbing kind. Steady. Like something wanted to hush the world long enough for him to hear the lie in his own story. He hadn't left the house in days. Casey was still there, still moving through rooms like she'd always belonged to them. Like the walls remembered her better than he did. She didn't sleep. He asked if she needed a room. She laughed like he'd told a joke about someone they both knew who died. He'd spent the night going through everything again. Old medical records, therapy transcripts, bits of his childhood journal. He'd recovered from a moving box he didn't remember packing.
Ow.
There was a theory forming. It had shape. It had weight. And for a few perfect hours, it made the world hold still. The hypothesis was this. The incident in the woods when he was 98.14? 5 was not a disappearance. It was a transfer. Some kind of cognitive switch. A glitch in memory storage. What they'd called dissociative trauma response. Might have been more literal than anyone realized. He wasn't just forgetting. He'd lived a different set of days. Rewritten timelines overlapping like transparent film reels. And now, all of it, the HOA confrontation, Karen's vanishing, the repeating audio files, Casey's return could be explained through that lens. It wasn't supernatural. It was neurological, a recovery process. The brain trying to synchronize with something it had split off from. He wrote it down on the whiteboard above his kitchen sink. False present equals accumulated error. Real present equals emotional imprint. Left behind resolution equals acceptance of the glitch. And for the first time, he felt calm. He shared it with Casey. Read it aloud like scripture. Her face didn't change. "You think this is about your memory?" she said, eyes fixed on the rain outside. "You still think this thing plays by your rules?" But she didn't argue. She just asked him what he remembered from the second day after they found him in the woods. He blinked. "I don't, exactly," she said. That's where it started rewriting. Still, Travis held on to the theory. He emailed it to 3 therapists, an old professor, even a local podcast host who ran a series called Buried Voices. Real unsolved mysteries you were never meant to hear. Then, around 3 a.m., something shifted. He opened the folder again, the one Casey had brought with the drawings and notes and faces he was supposed to recognize. On one sheet, in the bottom corner, there was a line he'd overlooked until now. Small sentence, etched in red ink, almost lost in the margin. "You found her before she went missing." His skin went cold. He'd thought Karen was a neighbor he'd met through petty parking disputes, that their first interaction had been weeks ago. But now a shape began forming in the back of his skull, soft at first, then heavier, hotter. A memory of her, but not here, not in this neighborhood, in a waiting room. Years ago, gray walls, a vending machine that didn't work. She was crying into a file folder. Travis had sat across from her holding a coffee he didn't want. A single phrase had passed between them. "I don't know where the time went." And now that memory felt uncomfortably real. He confronted Casey. "You said I drew her before I met her. But I did meet her in a hospital." Years ago, Casey's face broke, not in surprise, but in grief. "You weren't supposed to remember that?" she whispered. Suddenly everything tilted. pulled up his emails to verify his version of reality, but all drafts were gone. The sent folder was empty. His email signature was different, signed T.L. Hawkins instead of Travis L. Hawthorne, and when he checked his ID, it matched. He didn't remember ever changing it, didn't remember filing the name correction, didn't remember signing the lease on the house. Casey sat on the floor now, knees pulled to her chest. They told me if I stayed here long enough, you'd figure it out slowly, that you'd come to terms with it, that it would be less painful that way. Less painful than what? She looked up at him, than the truth. Then she reached into her coat and pulled out a Polaroid. It was him, sitting on the same couch, wearing the same shirt. But the date stamp read August 16th, 05, 2 days after he was found, smiling. Behind him on the wall was a shadow, not a person, a shape, long, low, animal-like. The same silhouette he'd seen flicker behind the glass in Karen's final frame. And suddenly, the illusion cracked. The theory didn't work anymore, because the glitch wasn't in his memory, it was in his existence. The only reason any of this felt like his life was because it had rehearsed itself enough times to convince him. He staggered to the mirror, stared hard, waited for anything to not line up. And there it was. His reflection blinked. Slightly too late, backed away, his voice barely audible. "What is this?" Casey stood, but the way she moved now felt borrowed, like she wasn't quite fitting inside her own limbs. "I told you," she whispered. "You found her before she went missing. And you followed her into the part of time no one's supposed to see." "You mean death?" he asked. She shook her head slowly. "No. Worse. What's underneath death?" And then it came. The event. The one that unraveled all of it. A knock at the door. 3 slow knocks, then silence. He turned to Casey, but she was gone. No exit sound, no footsteps, just gone. He opened the door, and there was himself. Not a clone, not a twin, not a mirror image. Older, worn, hair thinner, eyes darker, lips cracked. Holding a notebook Travis remembered burning in a dream 2 weeks ago. The older Travis spoke one sentence. "You let it follow you again?" Then he pressed something into his palm, a cassette tape, labeled Playback number 05. Travis stumbled backward, closed the door, shaking. He didn't own a cassette player. But he knew what was on the tape, his own voice. Not explaining, or not warning, begging. Because he remembered now the reason Karen vanished. The reason her car kept returning. The reason Casey seemed half real and the parking lot never dried after it rained. He was never meant to come back from the woods. Not in 05. Not ever. He had stayed there. Whatever version of him made it back wasn't the original. It was something else. Something that had been watching from the start, and it didn't care who Karen was, or what Casey remembered, or how many timelines had to fold to keep the secret buried. It only cared that he'd started remembering. And now, you watching this, you've heard the same word the baby said. You thought it was fiction, thought it was paranoia, but go back. Listen to the voicemail again. Watch frame 647. Slow it down. Listen closer. It's your name she whispers before she disappears. And if you hear it this time, really hear it, it means it's already inside you too. Travis stopped looking for explanations the night his neighbor Julian stood outside barefoot in the rain, holding a journal that didn't belong to him and whispering something over and over as Sterisk, you were right all along. He said it like a prayer, maybe a confession. But when Travis stepped outside to ask him what he meant, Julian didn't even look up. Just handed over the journal with fingers that shook like live wires and turned around to walk straight into the woods behind the development. No shoes. No flashlight. No hesitation. They never found him. The HOA claimed he moved, left a note turned in his key. But his mailbox still held this week's coupon flyer. The woman who walked her dog past his house each morning swore she still heard his TV on through the walls at night. It's a kind of static that doesn't stop when you unplug it. Inside the journal were pages upon pages of drawings. Of Karen, or Casey, or Travis butt symbols. Repeating marks that looked almost like letters but broke apart if you stared too long. They made your brain itch. Some of them were circled in red, others scratched out violently with notes like asterisk, not this layer, or do not show them this one again. And in the very center of the book, one drawing stretched across to pages a crude outline of a cul-de-sac with all the houses labeled by first names. Every resident in Travis's row accounted for, except for his. His lot was marked with 3 letters, R-A-W. He didn't understand what it meant, but it was starting to happen again. Slips. First, it was the dream. One where he was seated at a long table, surrounded by strangers who all wore faces he almost recognized. They passed a small box back and forth, whispering in voices he could hear in real life after waking. Not words, just the cadence, the beat of something rehearsed too many times. Each person at the table had a symbol stamped on their forehead like the ones in Julian's journal. He woke up with the imprint of one burned faintly into his wrist. It faded after 20 minutes like it had never been there. Then came the message, not from his email. From a burner account on a private message board he'd joined in college, but hadn't touched in over a decade. The post was buried under a topic titled Found Footage from 20 years ago. They wiped the originals. It had no likes, no comments, just an embedded video. The clip was silent. A grainy recording of a public school hallway. 2005. Children laughing, lockers slamming. But as the camera passed one of the classrooms, a figure inside turned directly toward the lens, froze, walked straight to the window, looked right through it. It was Travis. 9 years old, mouth moving, saying something soundless. Frame by frame, he watched himself mouth 3 clear words. Don't trust me. He slammed the laptop shut. But it didn't matter anymore. They were all starting to bleed through. The man at the gas station, who said, "You're from the cul-de-sac, right?" without being prompted. Uber driver who turned around mid-ride and said, "You got out once. That's rare." And the child at the grocery store who stared too long to still, before whispering to her mother, "He's from the place without a sky." All of them were watching, not the people, the ones underneath. Casey didn't return after that night, not in a physical way. But sometimes when the hallway light flickered at the wrong rhythm, he could see the imprint of her hand on the railing, like something had passed through the air and left a fingerprint in time. He started digging. He's found a basement beneath the HOA's clubhouse that wasn't on any blueprints. A storage room filled with boxes of handwritten complaints, all marked with the same 3 letters, R-A-W. The oldest complaint was dated October 1997. A woman named Rhoda Lance wrote, Asterisk Unit 6's lights blink in sequences of 3s and 4s. My husband says it's just a wiring issue. Or my daughter says it's Morse code. Last night, she woke up speaking in reverse. It was my voice, but she said things I've never said. She pointed to the wall and said, "That's not our house anymore." Asterisk. There was no record of Rhoda in the HOA files. But her name appeared again in Julian's journal, scribbled in the margin next to a crude symbol that resembled a sideways eye. Then came the file, left on Travis's doorstep in a manila envelope sealed with red wax. No name, just the words. Asterisk, you never escaped. You just changed roles. Asterisk. Inside were printed transcripts, pages of interviews, recordings, conversations between a child psychologist and various individuals who disappeared and then returned weeks or months later with no memory of the missing time. One of the transcripts included a conversation from 2006, 1 year after Travis came back from the woods. The child spoke in short, confused bursts, described a mirror place, where the sky was a ceiling of soft light, and people wore skin like masks. Then the voice changed. Mid-sentence became older, more sure, and it said, "He still thinks this is his first loop." The page ended abruptly. He didn't sleep for 2 days. Instead, he painted over every mirror in the house, took down photographs, removed anything that had his face on it, because now he wasn't sure which version of himself had come back. Then the observer showed up. They didn't give a name. Just called themselves Echo. They contacted Travis through an old IRC client he hadn't opened since college. Their messages came in bursts, each one appearing just before he thought the question, as if they weren't answering him but remembering for him. Echo, you were relocated. Echo, not rescued. Echo, RAW equals realignment after withdrawal. Echo, you're part of the archive now. Echo, worse, you're unstable. Echo, that's why others are watching. They need to see if it breaks again. Echo, you're not the first, Travis. He asked how many others there were. The response chilled him. Echo, we don't measure by people, Echo. We measure by loops. Everything spiraled after that. The dream returned, but this time he wasn't at the table. He was outside the room, watching through a glass wall.
Ow.
The people seated wore his face, some older, some younger, some ruined. And one of them turned slowly, met his eyes, and whispered something. He couldn't hear it in the dream, but he woke up speaking it. 3 words, "Don't trust me." And now you're watching. You've followed the footage. You've seen the gaps, the loops, the mirrored shadows. You've wondered if this was all just a story. But then you saw something in your own house, didn't you? A symbol you couldn't explain, a word in your dreams that didn't belong to any language you've ever heard, a voice from your speakers when everything was silent. You felt that glitch, that pause in conversation, the flicker of light where the moment didn't feel real. You thought you were just tired, but you were right all along. They've been watching you too. And now that you've seen this, you've joined the archive. There's no undoing that. Rewatch everything. Listen again. This time slow the frame at the 2:13 mark. Check the shadows behind Travis. One of them is your shape. It's already started.